good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are across the seven continents. My name is Juan Martel. I am the host of the Psych Life podcast. And here today we have a special guest Liefia Ingalls. How are you doing, Liefia?
I'm doing pretty okay. Same
Yeah,
journey.
same.
Same journey
So,
every day. Different
that
scene.
I'm digging the glasses.
Thank you. These are my favorites.
Yeah. So, just for the audience, Liefia Ingalls is a professional strongwoman and strength coach who happens to be the 2017 Arnold Professional Strongwoman Champion, and in 2018 also won the Strongest Woman in the World award. And those are some pretty big accomplishments, Liefia.
Yeah, I think they were.
We could sit here and talk about your accomplishments all day long, which are very impressive, and I know you have way more than that. But I think it would be very beneficial, and I've been wanting to have this podcast with you because you have accomplished a lot, and it's for me, it's more about what it takes to accomplish something, rather than the accomplishment itself. So often we focus on reaching the goal and thinking about the goal instead of actually focusing on the journey. And the goal can sometimes be so big that we lose focus on the little milestones that we try and we have to reach. And so I wanted to get your insight on all that good stuff. So one of the first things that I saw on that you constantly always preach is consistency. Can you talk a little bit more about how consistency and never stopping on your journey uh, contributed to some of the successes that you've had as a professional strong woman?
Yeah. I think my success in Strong Woman, from the time that I first incepted the idea that I wanted to put effort into strength training, that I wanted to compete, that maybe I wanted to win, right? That whole process was about a 10-year process. And I would say that the things I've achieved since then um, are even bigger and more impressive. And at no point did I ever feel like I was ready to arrive at those challenges necessarily. And no point did it ever feel like it was a single decision, right? So the reason that we focus on consistency is because big changes don't happen all at once. And when we're talking about big goals like winning a competition of that nature, none of this is a single step, right? There's not one single step that prepared me to compete at that level, and there's not one single step that allowed me to win. Each of those achievements was really the culmination of hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of small decisions, right? At over a 10-year period, or maybe even longer, right? If we want to dig all the way back into the reasons of before, like why I would have chosen those things, right? So when we're looking ahead at the future and saying, I want to achieve something, I want to do this thing, or I want to have this thing, I want to create something, the question that we need to ask is, who do I need to become in order to do that, right? Like the goal is not to make the achievement. The goal is to become the person who has the ability to make that achievement. So my process of strength training and competition and preparing for World's Strongest Woman, for example, was a 10-year process of really waking up every day and saying, what do I need to do today in order to eventually be the person who has those skills, who has that strength, who has that insight to win that competition. So the consistency is what's most important, because our real, maybe I feel like in general, the real enemy against us in growth is time. Right? So consistency is what allows us to keep making forward progress.
You know how you mentioned that it's not one decision, it's the accumulation of decisions that lead to that moment. That in psychology, it's called the butterfly effect. And we often think, oh, if this one person wouldn't have said this, then, or if only this one thing would have happened, I could have gone to the gym. If only this one thing would have happened, I would have reached XYZ goal. But it's really an accumulation of things that led to that moment. And it's not just one thing. And I love how you said that because we focus on the journey on whatever goal that we want to reach, but it's not just walking the path, focusing on that one goal. It's there's bigger goals and bigger goals. It's almost like a bunch of circular circles crossing each other to reach a certain destination. And that's so cool that you view it like that because and to be honest, I did a lot of studying on some of the interviews and stuff, and I know that you didn't just come from a powerlifting background per se. From what I saw, you focused a lot on kind of things that were from outside of Los Angeles, that were sports like hiking and outdoors, and you all these little decisions or being in college and doing sports led to powerlifting. So often, many of the people I work with, they think they have to decide at that moment, but if they just follow their interests little by little, the path will lead them to where they need to be. I have this equation that I created. I think I shared it a couple days ago on my Psych Life Instagram post, and it's consciousness, meaning the inner intelligence that we have, plus human action. So we have a desire for something, an interest. We put it into action, and then there's a third variable, time. And with that, because sometimes you can have a desire, you can have a want to reach something, to achieve something, to become someone. We put it into action. It's not a one-step thing. This is a life journey type of thing. And then with enough time, sometimes it takes longer than others. We can create whatever outcome that we want for ourselves. Now, some people can have a strong consciousness, but they don't put things into action. So obviously, that doesn't equate to success. But someone can have small desires, but always put them into actions, and they don't need a lot of time to achieve them because they're smaller. But when someone has some big goals for themselves, or big to themselves, it doesn't have to be externally measured, and they put it into action, and every day they wake up and they do it and they do it and they devote their time to it, it can lead to a big achievement. But what do you think about this equation that I have, which is consciousness plus human action divided by time, equates to outcome? Does it make sense, or is it something that it's like pseudoscience?
So consciousness, let me just correct, consciousness by action.
Plus action, and then um, a big division sign divided by time. And those
Okay.
three variables together, they equate to whatever we want in life to achieve, whether it's growing a plant or a big goal like winning a powerlifting competition.
So I like this. I like this abstract math. Um, so what I'm looking at is, so you said consciousness plus action. So you're saying that consciousness and action are additive, right? That they're summary, but they're similar amounts, and that time is the part that's going to divide that consciousness and action. Time is a tricky one because time is the one that we don't really get to control, right? We can decide how much attention we put into something and how much effort, attention, consciousness, I would say attention, and action, effort, right? We can choose in the now how much to put in those things, but we don't know how much time we get to do that.
Yeah.
That part's a mystery. So that one's pretty cool. But I don't know, what I think about this is I have a few abstract math that I use as well, like with my clients in coaching, and it reminds me of this is similar. So one is that in strength, and when we talk about like the neurological process of strength, right? When you go into the gym and you lift weights, you create stress. And this stress causes this stress on the brain causes an adaptation, right? And this process of the adaptation, this is what we are in pursuit of when we're in pursuit of strength. So when we go to the gym and lift weights, we're actually creating a stressful situation in the hopes that we will grow in response to that stress. And the growth in response to that stress is the strength. Strength is a factor of your attention, right? How much attention is going in there because of focus, because the amount that you are aware of the stimulus enhances the saliency of the stimulus, right? So the amount of focus that you're putting into the effort or the stress with the amount of intensity of that stress. Does that make sense? And so when I
Yeah,
think about your consciousness plus action feels a lot to me like attention and intensity, right? Your consciousness, the amount that I am paying attention, putting in focus, consciously, mindfully focusing on what is the stimulus that I'm feeling, or what is the movement or the sensation that I'm trying to achieve. And that is additive or multiplied maybe by the intensity of the stimulus, right? Which in the gym would be like how heavy it is, how difficult it is for you to do, right? And then time is a factor in there because time would be our factor of repetition, right? So you can choose every day in the gym how much you pay attention, where your attention goes and what you're focusing on learning. You can choose how to modulate the intensity by increasing the load, increasing the stimulus, or decreasing it, or varying it depending on what you need. And then the way that we get to choose to manipulate or control time, in this case, is the consistency. It's by deciding to show up again and again and again and again when we can. That's the part of time that we get to control. So it's maybe not the exact same, maybe it's not the exact same equation, but I think it's very similar. And you're talking about self-development, and I'm usually talking about strength training. But I think that we're having the same conversation because strength training
it's
is strength training is just a model of the process of learning, because it is. When you go into the gym and you lift weights or practice a movement for your sport, what you're doing is learning a skill. Strength is a skill. Your brain's ability to lift more weight in response to training, right? Your muscles growth and your brain's ability to increase your ability to do that movement, right? Like how heavy you can lift in the gym. This is the process of your brain learning how to more efficiently do that movement, how to activate more muscle tissue at once, right? More muscle cells at once, how to coordinate that contraction, add more speed, right? Your brain is learning a complex process of coordination when you lift. And that's just one of the models of the way that we learn. So strength training is itself a very useful model, I think, for personal growth and development.
it almost sounds like the equation I meant. I mean, I created that like a year ago, and what you're using, it's almost the same exact thing, except if we substitute consciousness for focus, then it makes a lot more sense. The time, time, we don't, like you mentioned, we don't control it, but it exists. In a matter of fact, everything around us, including our bodies, is built on top of time. And for example, this where the recording's being done, my body, this shirt, it's built on top of it. It can only last so long before it gets destroyed. Anything that exists, it's really like that. I love how you're implementing um knowledge towards your training for and mentoring of other of your clients, and the same concept within other paradigms within our lives. You know, it's about putting stress, and just the right amount of stress is from, and I'm forgive me, this is what I understood, is great. And our brain learns to adapt, our body learns to adapt, and all of a sudden the neurological changes start taking place. One of the biggest neurological changes that can occur for a person is when they learn new things. Do you see oftentimes when you're training, or even for yourself, when you're trying new things? Because I know that you've tried new things in the past, like moss wrestling and stuff, that you all of a sudden see a change within yourself when you're trying new things and you're pushing on that new thing to become better. Instead of staying on the surface of the ocean, you're diving deep into this new thing. Do you see the changes in your clients and in yourself?
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen the change in myself very much. I'm definitely not the same person I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And hopefully none of us are, because we're growing all the time. But the the way that my mindset has shifted is really drastic. And it, I put a lot of the process with strength training and then later competition, because that was the model for me where I saw that work. Um, one of the one of the biggest transformations and changes that I had in my learning was being able to, for the first time, being able to break out of like limiting self-beliefs. Um, you had mentioned like I didn't have a background in sports, right? A lot of people in strength competition had always been athletes or had a long experience with athleticism, and that drove them into strength training or taught them strength training. And I didn't have that. I didn't have a background in sports. And I had a background that was really disadvantaged by all accounts. So I didn't have much of a sense of deserving anything. Um, I was very unconfident in myself. Um, and I had a lot of self-doubt. So, there's plenty of times if you would have gone back to me, especially like at the beginning of my strength training career, and said, "Hey, you're gonna do really well at this. In fact, you'll be the best in the world." I probably would have not believed that. Um, because it just didn't make sense to me then. But when I started lifting, it was the first time that I saw like really tangible results where the thing that I was struggling with, the thing that I was bad at, right? Like go in the gym and the whole point of strength training is to like expose your weaknesses, right? It's to face the things that you can't do very well, right? Um, so undertaking this process of, going into the gym and understanding the way my body moved, not just how it wanted to move, but realizing the limitations that I had, realizing the places where, hey, I want to be able to do this and I can't. And it was the first time that I really was forced, maybe isn't the right word because no one else was forcing me to it, but I decided to really embrace that feeling rather than running away from it. Um, I There's a lot of experiences I didn't have when I was a kid, but I was always very smart and I learned very quickly. What I learned about myself was that if something was easy to learn at the beginning, that was meant for me. That was a something that I was good at, that I was meant to do. And if I tried to do something and I struggled with it, that meant I wasn't supposed to do that, right? Like that just wasn't for me. And this is a very, very limiting, right? Self-perception. And strength training was the first time when I started interacting with something and I was like, oh, this is difficult. I can't do this thing, right? Like I would go to, try a lift and I would struggle with it. But rather than run away and say, oh, I guess I'm just not good at that, I would say, okay, then I guess I have to come back tomorrow and try again. And so that was for, there's lots of different reasons why. Um, we could probably talk about that all day, but for whatever reason, that was finally the time that I was ready to do that, right? I was ready to submit to that process of failure, of facing difficulty, of struggling with learning. And as we know, that's actually where the magic is, right? It's the place where you struggle with learning the right amount of stress, right? The right amount that says that tells your brain it needs to change in order to adapt to the challenge that's in front of it, but not so much that it feels overwhelmed and it wants to shut down and run away, right? So lifting, I think it had a lot to do with, just the timing. It had a lot to do with my education, my desire with fun, with the social aspects around it. But when I got into strength training, it was the first time that I finally felt comfortable struggling. I finally felt comfortable admitting, like, I'm bad at this thing, and I'm not going to let that stop me from continuing to try. Yes, I'm bad at this thing, but I'm going to keep showing up until it gets a little bit better. And that's exactly what happened. I kept showing up to the thing that humbled me, that made me feel like, wow, this is difficult. I can't do this thing. And I kept showing up to that place to face it and work on it. And over time, that changed. The perception of can't and can changed, because all of a sudden that was exactly the process. Like, I would show up and say, like, I can only lift this much. Here's the limit. But if I show up day after day, week after week, month after month, now all of a sudden something that wasn't possible back then is now possible. And the only thing that changed in that was my decision to keep showing up, right? Like, that was the only thing that changed in my perception, right? Obviously, I grew, like, I adapted and I grew strength. My muscles grew and my brain learned how to do that lift better. But that process only happened in response to me deciding to say, like, okay, I'm gonna face the challenge.
Well, you and I, we would have met no matter what, whether you succeeded or not. But I'm sure glad that you never stopped and you were consistent. And you have a quote that says, "When it comes to the yoke," I was from a 2022 interview with Deuce Jim. You said, "The yoke, that's what life feels like, where everything is just weighing down on you, and you are using all your energy to stay up." Because the yoke, for those that don't know, from what I saw, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you're holding a bunch of weight like this, and it's almost like you have to kind of walk with it. It seemed like on the videos, and the pressure feels so much that someone wants to give up. It's so easy to drop the weight and say, "Forget about this. I'll do it tomorrow," or I don't want to do it. I want to do other exercises, which so happens to so many of us that go to the gym sometimes. It's because when you said you're using all your energy to stay up. And so often life feels like that for so many of us. And so to use something from one paradigm, in this case, strength training, or for others, it's reading about cultures or growing flowers and gardening, all the stuff you can learn in one paradigm, it could be applied the same philosophies into other aspects of a person's life. Can you talk about maybe what your experience has been like with the yoke, either with you or your clients, and how they can sometimes apply that when they're holding it and they want to give up, but maybe they're pushed and they push themselves, how that transitions to other aspects of their life?
The yoke is unique in that it's just a lot of weight. The way that it distributes load, most people can carry way more weight than they ever expected. And that's, I think, where the power in that event comes as a model for the self-development, because it's like, this is a good example. You train a little bit, right? Like, how much do you deadlift? Or how much do you think you could deadlift or squat? Oh, I got it. Sorry, I don't want to put
Squat.
you on
I'll do
blast.
the No, no. I'll do the squat. I actually did it yesterday, and I did 225 4 times. I wanted to do it five, but you know
Okay.
what? Maybe I could have, maybe I couldn't, but I racked it up.
Sure. But okay, so this is as a good example, right? So if you did, 225 on your back squat, but have you ever carried a yoke?
I'm not.
Right. So your frame of reference for how much weight you can put on your back is probably your back squat. So if I said, okay, but like how much do you think you could carry on a yoke? That's what you would think to. You would your brain would jump to whatever is the closest approximation of that experience and how heavy that felt, right? So you would think, okay, I could probably do 225 because I've done that with my back squat, maybe a little bit heavier, maybe 250, something like that. But you would think about that range because you would approximate to an experience that you know, right? The yoke as a piece of equipment, because of where the weight is anchored and how it's distributed around the body, you would be able to carry, if you could do 225 back squat, you could probably carry 350 on a yoke, probably even more, right? So if you showed up to train that day and I said, okay, you're probably going to carry 350 pounds on your back today, that would sound like a really intimidating experience, most likely, because you would be scanning your memory of times that you've had weight on your back like that. And you would think back to like the heaviest squat you've ever done, which may be around, which would probably be less than 350, right? So this experience now all of a sudden is like, oh, shoot, like what's happening? It creates something that's sort of intimidating, but then you actually do that in training and see like, oh, there's a difference there. But we would be able to walk you through that. And, everyone's different. Like, I wouldn't guarantee it until we tried it, but that's a very good example. Like if you could do 225 on a squat for a few reps, you could probably do 350 on a yoke carry. And we could probably get you from day one being like, oh, that sounds impossible. I don't think I could walk with 350 pounds on my back to, oh wow, I just walked with 350 pounds on my back. Right. And so the power of just seeing that, right? Like in conversation, like hearing yourself say, I don't think I can do that, or hearing yourself set the limit, right? If I said, what do you think your max is going to be? How much do you think is the most you could carry on your back? And you say, I think it's going to be this much. And then we change that right in front of you, right? That is magic because you'll see now you'll be thinking like, okay, well, I said this was my limit, but why? Right? Why was that your, and then realizing that the reality of what you could do was very possibly different. And that just, it changes something in how you think, right? It starts to change this because you start to see that around you everywhere. You think like, I can do that thing or I can't do that thing. But it's like, well, why do I think I can't do that? Right? Why do I think I can't do something? Usually it's because we have similar experiences and we chose to believe that those were the final results. But there's all of these ways that we can change and work with that. And I think as well as just in like having those experiences repeatedly over time is what helps us carry over so much into the emotional world because that metaphor of like when you're trying to do a heavy yoke carry, when you're maxing out a heavy yoke carry, it literally feels like something is trying to crush you. It externalizes and makes very tangible in a way these feelings that we often feel with our emotions. That's what a lot of emotional stress feels like. It feels overwhelming, right? It feels like we're being crushed by outside circumstances. And to take that emotional experience and externalize it into something physical and then defeat it in the physical realm, right? Like, yes, this thing felt like it was actually crushing me, but yet I picked it up and I moved it over there and I'm not crushed, right? It just takes the sting off of those similar emotional experiences, right? When you have real world physical tangible experiences that match those emotions, right? Because then I find myself later, and this is how I operate much more now, like having had those experiences, when I do find myself feeling overwhelmed emotionally, experiencing what really is my body's response to stress, right? My response to mobilize or defend myself from physical stress, but it's not there because what I'm stressed about is up here, right? Something that's more cognitive. I can draw back on those memories that where, or those experiences where that overwhelm was physical, and still draw back and go, oh yes, but I know that when I feel this way, even though I feel like I'm being overwhelmed, even though it feels like I'm going to be crushed, even though it feels like I'm going to fall down and fail, I can still be successful. And I still have been. I have been successful even when I've felt this way.
Yeah. I
So
love how the blowing through the lid and seeing, oh, I could have done this. I did it. And now when they look at something else in their life that they think they can't do, they can remember, hey, but I did it with Leifa. I remember that. Or in your case, and in each individual person's case. And that's what's up. And I'm gonna, I don't know, I don't think there's a place by here that I know of that I can do the yoke, but definitely I'm gonna go a little harder on those squats. I promise.
I think
Um,
there probably is.
but
Also, if there's stuff like that you want to train, we can talk about it. I can give you some ideas. You can train it yourself, you know. But if you're already
I'm
in the
gonna have to
gym,
take you up.
like, yeah, it doesn't have to be yoga. It can be anything, right? Like strongman toys are just big and extreme, and so they just do this really to the max. So it just makes it the loudest. But I mean, anything that you're doing, you can do it with any tool in the gym, and that's why I focus on strength training. It's not because I think physical strength is the most important attribute or thing that we should spend our time on. It's just that the physicality of strength training is, I believe, the most accessible model for this process of self-assessment and challenge and development that we have, because you can find a way to apply um, stress adaptation. You can find a way to do strength training anywhere with anything.
I appreciate it. I'm gonna have to take you up on that offer. I can't back down now. In yoga, and by the way, yoga in the West, it's not about like a stretching exercise, it's a physical exercise. But what I'm talking about is real yoga. And yoga has four parts. Body is just one. There's a mind part where the in yoga it's called the mental part, where it's a little bit every day. You learn a little bit every day, you train a little bit every day, you commit yourself a little bit every day, and little by little, not all at once, you'll eventually get to where you need to get to. This is the long way. This is the way where it's logically it makes sense that if you pick up a book, you're only going to read 10 pages. But there's the other part of yoga, which they attribute a lot to an all or nothing approach. They also, but in yoga, it's called an emotion. It's a heart. It's an emotional approach. When you give it, you go all in. Or what worked for you? The little by little, or the all in approach? That once you decided this was what you're gonna do, you went in and you committed 100%. What worked best for you?
Well, not to be difficult, but it's both. And I think you can't really separate them. Um, you need vision to stay consistent, and vision is what you develop when you go all in, right? When you say, I want to become that person, right? Because again, but the accomplishment, in order to accomplish something, you need to become the person who's capable of doing it. So what I was focusing on, and what I encourage people to focus on when you're setting that future goal of like, okay, I want to be, best in the world, or whatever the thing is that you're trying to do, you're focusing on that future version of yourself, right? You're focusing on who is that person, what abilities do they have, what systems do they have, what habits do they have that allows them to do those things, right? And I want to become that person. And in order to materialize that vision, and you have to want to become that person. right? You have to be all in on this vision, right? Like when I thought about the person I would need to become in order to win this big, in order to win these big titles, like I couldn't just choose a piece of that. I couldn't just be like, oh, I just want to be strong enough to do that, but I want to have these other things. Like I had to look at who that person was, and that person has to be a version of me that I'm willing to become. So the commitment, the idea of like, I'm going all in, what you're doing when you say you're going all in is saying, I'm committed to becoming that whole thing, right? That vision is important. It's necessary for the consistency because the path to get there is long and difficult and frustrating and stressful and scary. And it's just filled with a million reasons to quit. And the way that you get through each of those obstacles is by recommitting to that vision, right? For me, it was an actual visualization of what it would feel like in that moment to stand and raise the trophy, right? To stand there and have everyone see me and me say, it was me, I did it, right? I won. This vision of like, what would that feel like? Because that was the feeling that I was interested in, right? And having that, having a clear vision on that is what allowed me to commit to that. Having that commitment is what allowed me to go through the consistency, right? But then the act of consistency, the habits, the patterns, that is one day at a time. That is one step at a time, right? So you need both. I like the metaphor we talked a lot about hiking before, and I really like that as a metaphor because again, taking these difficult concepts that are emotional and kind of abstract in our minds, but transferring them on the physical environment around us, this helps us to understand, I think, a lot better. And it's the same. If you set out on a hike and you don't choose a destination, you might get somewhere good, but you also probably, the likelihood that you're going to get where you need to go, especially if the path is difficult, is pretty low, I would say. So you need to have a clear vision of your destination, right? That's the commitment, saying this is where I'm going. But also, once you start out on that path, if you're staring at the top of the mountain the whole time, you're going to fall in a hole, right? You're going to trip on some branches or some rocks on the way if all you're doing is looking up. So you need to have clarity of the vision of where your direction is going so that you can confirm each step is going in the right direction. But then, moment by moment, you need to focus on your feet, right? You're going to have to, the path is going to have to be cut down into these smaller steps, and you're going to have days and moments where certain things are easy and certain things are difficult, and you need to be able to separate that and say, yes, this is still the correct direction. I am still headed where I need to go. And yet right now, what I need to focus on is this one step. I need to focus on this one boulder that's in the way of my path.
A clear vision so you can commit, but then also focus on the path because there's going to be a lot of lessons along the way is what I'm hearing. And that's thank you for that. I try to practice both. And typically, when a person is very heart oriented and they just commit to things, the person with a strong mind looks down upon it. And then it's vice versa. The person with a strong heart is always saying, oh, this person's always analyzing everything. But you actually need a little bit of both to reach wherever you're trying to be or go and to never question the consistency. I love that answer. So you mentioned, to use your words, a clear vision to become who I need to become, and I practice that every day, but with an extra element, which is to become who I need to become. I have to destroy a piece of myself so oftentimes. This is a yoga practice. That's why it goes beyond body. It's a yoga practice. Is that applicable for you in any way? To become who we need to become, we have to destroy a piece of ourselves. And every time we find something new about ourselves on who we need to be or what we need to adjust about ourselves, a piece of ourselves has to go away or be destroyed. Another way of viewing this is kind of like an evolution, like a circle. Create, preserve, and we hold on to it, and then we realize it doesn't suit us anymore. So we destroy it, then we create, preserve, destroy, create, preserve, destroy. So what do you think about that? To become who we need to become, do we have to destroy a piece of ourselves?
Um, I think in essentially, yes, I agree with that point very much. Although I think that the word destroy can have a strong connotation for people. So I would say that, you know, in technically, yes, I would agree with this, but I think that maybe some nuance of the meaning, right? Every act of creation is also an act of destruction, right? Something, if you want to build a house, you need lumber or stone, right? You need to take something else, an element, and pull it apart, right? So everything that you want to create involves the destruction of something else. But destroy can have such a harsh connotation when we're talking about ourselves, when we're talking about our emotional parts, right? And so I would just soften it. And I would say that we don't need to destroy a part of ourselves in order to grow, but we do need to let our past selves go, right? We do need to release them or, you know, release things, release patterns and habits that aren't helping us anymore, or we do need to allow those parts of ourselves to die. Um, and the only reason I just there's that tension there is because sometimes, you know, and you understand this, but um, a lot of the change that, a lot of the difficulty that we have in changing isn't necessarily about becoming the new self. It's because we're still hanging on to an old self. And a lot of times those old selves, we're still hanging on to them because there's some unresolved pain there, right? There's some part of that past self that didn't get love, right? And so to look at that part and say, well, I need to destroy you. Well, yeah, it does need to exit, right? You need to let it go. But, you know, if you're looking at a part of yourself that you're stuck in because it didn't really get the attention or the love that it needed, then like might actually be hard to think about destroying it, right? But instead, if we can think about looking at it, honoring it, loving it, and then allowing it to leave, right? That might be a little easier. Um, and I think I know in my experience that was a lot. That you know that connotation of that word is very heavy for me because that's about how I lived for most of my life. I had a lot of self-loathing. I had a lot of parts of myself that I didn't want to accept. And I had a lot of motivation to do exactly that, to destroy those like previous versions of myself that I didn't love, right? And I didn't love them because they didn't feel good enough. And I did seek to destroy them. Um, but it got a lot easier. It was a lot easier to move away from them when I tried to integrate them instead, right? Instead of destroying them, I tried to understand them. And then once I understood them, they didn't need to hold me back anymore. So they still leave, right? This cycle of destruction or change, the cycle of death and rebirth, right? This is happening to us all the time as we grow.
I appreciate the terminology adjustment, and I know destroy or destruction's a little intense. It was just from the yogi literature, I promise.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I 100% with you. I 100% I'm with you, and thank you for sharing and being vulnerable with that. And I love how you say in the process of unbecoming that part, we have to accept it and almost understand it, and just let it go. And that process is a process that I tell my clients a lot of times because I tend to use an existential approach in therapy. of unbecoming, and this process has to happen daily to some extent, almost to start from zero every morning. So thank you for sharing that. I so in these, you know, the cycle, right? Creation, preserving, then unbecoming to then create. These circular patterns is happening all around us in life. Our minds wants to view things in a linear format of, especially with time, but everything's happening circular. What's presented in front of me goes into my senses, whether it's vision, hearing, in this case, hearing you or smelling, whatnot. Then my brain has a response. And then there's a sensory input, and then there's a response. There's a sensory input, and there's a response. This this happens mostly unconsciously. If I see a lion, I'm not, it's a sensory input, and then my heart starts beating, and then I probably am thinking of how I'm going to leave. I don't have to think about thinking that; it just does it. How do you this process of sensory input and then brain reaction in lifting, powerlifting? How do you think it changes a person when they have all that weight and that sensory input is coming and that brain response is going?
Um, I think that from my experience and what I see, I think that the value in lifting, a lot of the value in lifting and specifically strength training with high intensity and or pursuing competition like that, is that it gives us a way to safely interact with that sympathetic stress response, right? So the one that you're describing, like when you say like, hey, if I see a lion, right, this stimulus from the outside environment activates, my brain processes this and then it creates a response. And that sympathetic stress response, the fight or flight response, right? This is what rules most of our lives. Because this by nature it changes the way that we perceive and the way that we behave. But in the current space that we live in, this time and place in our culture, right, we live in a manner that we're constantly being stressed, right? So the way that our brain responds to stress is evolved to deal with physical threats, but yet we live in a world where we're constantly being bombarded with metaphysical threats, cognitive threats, stress that is emotional and cognitive, not really physical, right? But the stress response is similar. So I kind of talked about this when we are talking about the yoke, where like going in the gym and lifting heavy or learning how to compete in a physical outlook. So whether it's lifting weights or wrestling or some sport, whatever it is that you can achieve that, it gives you an ability to practice what a proper response to that stimulus feels like, right? It models for us how to regulate the stress response. That when we get stressed, when we face an overwhelming stressor, when we face a stimulus that feels like a threat to our nervous system, it models for us, teaches us that we have the ability to engage with that, which enhances our sense of agency. And that gives us this ability to understand what it feels like to regulate ourselves in response to stress.
In your strength coaching, oftentimes you focus on empowering others as part of the training process. Can you share why you find this so important?
So in the interest of privacy and confidentiality, I won't tell personal stories from the clients that I have, but I wish that I could, because the things that, as it's almost kind of frustrating. The work that I've done with a lot of my athletes, I think is really impressive. The things that they've done is really impressive, right? So I've coached people now that have transformed their mind and their bodies. They've won championships. We've got multiple pro cards, world records, best in the world. I have athletes now that have outperformed what I ever did as an athlete by a lot. Those are the on paper achievements. Um, and I think they are impressive, but I know that the changes that those people have to go through emotionally and personally in order to get those things done, those are the things that are not on the scoreboard. Those are the things that are not on the resume. And those changes are so impressive. Um, I the athletes that I've worked with, we watch them go through this process, and I watch people completely change how they view themselves. They learn they learn what they're capable of. They learn they grow confidence, where they feel like, a lot of times when I first start working with people, they're like, I need a coach because I don't know anything, and I suck at all these things, and I need help, right? And then eventually we get to a point where, I mean, I'm still helping guide them, but primarily what I'm teaching them along the way is not is independence. It's saying, hey, you can do this process, and just being there to remind them that, yeah, it feels difficult. That doesn't mean we need to stop. If the path changes or the goals changes, then we just need to keep making sure that that vision is correct, right? We need to just make sure that the consistency we're building is always going on in the right direction. And as long as we're doing that process day in and day out, you're going to get where you need to go. And to watch them trust that, to watch them trust themselves, you know, I just the personal transformation that I've seen in some of the clients that I've worked with, like if even I'm surprised, even I'm surprised at like how far they've come, how much emotional maturity they've developed, how much they've developed in their work, in their relationships, in just like all areas of their life. They're really growing up. Um, and that is, I don't know that I can describe the meaning of it, but I think that I don't have any kids, but I think it's the closest thing to like being a parent, that like the pride that a parent feels, like watching them figure it out, watching them go from a place of like being insecure or being worried or, feeling like they're lacking in something that they need, and then having those achievements that they focus on, and then seeing how that changes their life because now they know they can do hard things. Now it's just a matter of them choosing which things they want to do.
And that has to come from within them, right? And knowing what they seek the help, and but getting them, and I know you're not going to share personal stories, but I coach as well, and basketball, and I'll get the text at 11 in the morning, coach, are you going to meet me tomorrow at the courts at 8 o'clock? And stuff like that. And even though I had nothing planned with them, I'm going to show up because they're interested. Kind of empowering others is a sociability thing. And when I met you, there was a gentleman, and I'm so sad that I forgot his name in this podcast. I think his name started with a T, but he
Probably
Tamer,
Tomer.
Tomer,
Tomer's one of my best friends. I
and
think
I and I still remember in my mind because he said it so many times that night, about the gym, that oh, it's about building a community. He kept saying that it's about a community. I would tell him the gym I go to, and then he would tell me, oh, you got to try this gym because it's a community, and if you like that, that's what. How important is it for an athlete to have that community, to help them propel them forward, which is kind of part of empowering.
mean, it's critical. And I think it's not just critical for athletes. I think it's critical for all of us, for humans, right?
Mhm.
We are not, humans are not solitary animals, right? And I think it's critical for us in any endeavor. But I think that the more difficult something is, right, the higher that mountain is that we want to climb, the more often it's going to be challenging, the more often we're going to feel stressed, right? The bigger the challenge, the more we need support, and the more critical that support is going to be. So in strongman, like, it's an individual sport. right? Like when we go out and compete, it's you versus everybody else. There's no team dynamics, right? But nothing that I did as an individual athlete would have been possible if I was doing everything on my own. Like um, everything from, learning and motivating, right? Like in the 6 years that I was training and competing leading up to World's Strongest Woman, I I trained on average 4 days a week. The amount of times that I didn't want to go to the gym or would go to the gym thinking, man, I don't know. I don't know if I feel like being here. I feel like this isn't going to work. I want to quit and give up. Probably more than half, if I'm being honest, right? And so if I was trying to do that completely on my own, I probably, I don't know. I don't know if I would have been strong enough to committed enough to do it. But usually, I would go to the gym and I would meet my training partners and having people there to remind me that no, you don't want to quit. You just feel tired today. We're going to keep going, right? That's also, that's the primary role that the coach fills, right? The coach's primary role is just to be that sounding board, right? The athlete is the one that has to do the work, that has to do the change, that has to do the development, get the skills, do the competition. The coach's primary role is, I believe, not necessarily direction so much as it is just reflection, to just stand there and remind them that, yes, we're doing the right thing, right? So I think that having some feedback is absolutely critical, but the more you can build community around it, the more we are, I believe, as humans, interested in facing that challenge, because our community is what gives us meaning, right? All of the achievements that we might want, somebody might want a cool job or to win an award or a title or to do a cool trick or like whatever, like none of that means anything if people you care about aren't there to witness it, right? Like the reason we want those things, every achievement that we can think about that we want, usually the reason we want those things is because we want to share them, right? We want to feel good about ourselves because we want the people that are around us that we care about to go, wow, that's awesome that you did that thing, right? So the community is is not just a bonus, it's a critical component, and in actual strength training, like actually in strongman, just to be practical, like there were plenty of times where like the practice that I needed to do for events, because strongman events are like massive and absurd sometimes, right? Like there were days where in order to train for an event, for a competition that I was prepping for, I needed like 6 guys to help me like move the equipment or like set it up correctly. Like that type of like the actual training, physical training that I needed to do wouldn't have been possible if I didn't have a whole team of people to help me. But on a, you know, on a bigger scale or outside of that specific strongman, even if the thing I was doing was something I could prepare and work on by myself, the reality is like it's never just going to be easy, right? Um, I think that a really common mantra that we talk about is that motivation follows movement, right? You don't get motivated to move. You get motivated by your own movement. You start, and it is the movement and it is the progress that you're already making that motivates you to continue, right? Like that's how you build motivation. You're not just born with it. It doesn't just show up. It's not an idea, right? So the the way that we build motivation most effectively is going to be with our community, right? That's what gives us meaning. And is also what helps us just like stay floating, stay going when we get tired. So having a team, even if it's not, maybe it's like a specific sports team or a coach that you hired, but even just having, you know, people that you make yourself accountable to in that change, right? People that you want to report to, people that you want to be proud of you when you make the change that you're seeking to make, right? By collecting those people and creating that accountability, creating those connections, those witnesses to our progress, this is the most certain way to make sure that we succeed. I
I'm,
think,
I'm gonna I'm, no, I'm sorry for interrupting. I'm sorry for
Um,
interrupting.
yeah, well, just that was a complete thought, but I just wanted to tell a story because this is a cool story that I kind of forgot about. My very first strongman or strongwoman competition, the very first competition that I did. I did not, I had not done the events before. I didn't have access to a lot of equipment. I didn't know anybody that competed in strongman. I found this on the internet and I had like researched stuff and I wanted to do this competition. So I found a competition locally. It was California Strongest Man and Woman in Huntington Beach, which is in the strongman universe, like it's an amateur competition, but it's a high level amateur competition. So like the people who win this competition very regularly go on to become pros and win world championships. So it's not an easy contest. And I didn't know any of that. I just knew this was the closest one to me. It was, an hour drive from where I lived. And I signed up knowing that I had no experience and I probably couldn't do any of the events because I didn't recognize them. Like one of the events was a yoke. Actually, funny that I thought about this because one of the events was a yoke and the weight I think was about 300 pounds or over 300 pounds, like 300, 320, something like that. And I had never carried a yoke, so I had no equivalency to like do this. The only thing I had was barbells at the gym where I worked at, and I practiced by carrying a barbell on my back. And the heaviest I could go was about 225. This is hilarious. So I remember practicing with that and being like, well, I probably can't do 300 because this 225 feels super heavy with a barbell. Like that's it. But I didn't know. But I knew that if I really wanted to learn this about this sport and I really wanted to like get into it, I needed people. I needed a community. I needed to find other people who knew what this stuff was and who had the equipment could like teach me about it, right? I needed to find a strongman community. So I signed up for this competition because I knew that's where they would be, right? And I could just go to the competition, but I was like, well, I want to try the stuff too. So like I'm just going to do the event. So I signed up for this competition, no experience. I was not prepared at all. And I knew that, but I was like, well, that where else am I going to learn? Here I go. And I took a friend with me, the only friend that I really liked. I told people that I was competing in this, but I brought this one friend with me, um, and she was like, I'd love to come see you compete. And I was like, I don't really want anyone to see me compete because it's not going to be good. Like I'm probably going to zero these events. And I don't know if it's going to be like embarrassing or what, because I don't know how the people are going to be there. But she was like, no, 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 I want to come. I want to see. And I got to the competition and everyone was big and scary and intimidating. And the whole thing was overwhelming. And I panicked. I got so nervous. I went and I threw up on the sand because the competition is like on the beach. Yeah, I like ran off and like threw up in the sand because I was so nervous. And I was like, I can't do it. I'm gonna have to just leave. Um, and I would have left if I hadn't brought my friend. And because then when I thought about like, oh, I just want to leave. These people don't know me. They won't know I was here. It's fine. But then I thought about it and I was like, oh, but then I'm gonna have to tell her. I spent the whole car ride talking to her about how like, yeah, I know this seems crazy, but I want to do this thing. I think it would be really fun. I want to try it out. And I was like, I just got done telling her how I wanted this thing, how I wanted to be able to do this thing. I wanted to be here. I wanted to take this challenge and take this ride and see how it felt. And now I'm gonna have to explain to her that I want to go home. And then I was like, I can't. That was the thing, right? The thing that was stronger than my fear was the maybe it's just responsibility or embarrassment or shame. I don't know. But it came from a place of like, I wanted to impress her because I had shared with her, we had shared our vulnerability about this challenge that we wanted to do and how like this seems crazy. Everyone thinks I seem crazy for wanting to do this thing, but like I want to do it. And because she had shared that with me, I didn't want I didn't want to mess that up. So I stayed and I participated in the competition because the discomfort of letting my friend down was bigger than my fear of being embarrassed or whatever it was that I was worried about there. and I competed in the competition and I took 4th place. And I did a bunch of stuff I didn't even know I could do, like carry a yoke, and lift an Atlas stone. And that was also where, that competition was hosted by East Coast, West Coast Strength and Conditioning, which is a gym out here in Costa Mesa. And that gym and the crew of strongman competitors that competes there, that runs that competition, that became the community that I built into. I came to compete and they said, "Hey, you haven't done this before?" And I said, "No." They're like, "Well, you seem to be like you could learn a lot. You should come train with us." And so that's where my whole journey started. And that's where I found the bigger community in strongman. That's where it all started for me. And the reason I was able to get through that ledge moment of fear and anxiety was because of the connection that I had to the one person that I brought there, that one piece of accountability that I made for myself. That was what did it. And if that wasn't there, I probably would have went home. I probably would have went home and not come back and just been like, it would have just been a story about like, yeah, one time I almost did a strongman show.
Yeah, thank goodness for your friend. And, shame serves a purpose. All the emotions we have, they serve a purpose from an evolutionary standpoint. And thank goodness for your friend and the feeling of shame. You didn't want to let her down. But that definitely answers the question. And it's Homer, he really has it right that when he says that, part of gym is being a community. The movement leads to motivation part that you were mentioning. I'm gonna have to add that in the equation somewhere that I initially mentioned the podcast, because consciousness plus human action, but the action itself creates more motivation, which is consciousness, what I consider consciousness, and it creates like this circular pattern there. I I have a tremendous amount of respect for you and the training that you do as a competitor, but also how you're incorporating training and all these other aspects of life and how you're applying and intertwining it. The the most important thing I want for my guests to get, aside from meeting you, is that stress is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing when it's done in the right amount. And if when we feel stressed, we can keep going and challenge ourselves, then not only are we building new neurological pathways and not only are we hitting different perceptions about ourselves, then we are also creating opportunities for ourselves in other parts of our life. This even more than where that stress, not just where that stress is, but in other parts. And I think that's where a lot of your training lies, Leifa, and why you're so such a good all around person. To be honest with you, so I want to give you the closing remarks on. First off, thank you for coming. Okay, thank you for being on the
Having
podcast.
me. I enjoyed talking to you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And I know that you're the owner of Unicorn Strength. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Unicorn Strength Training is just the name for my coaching business. I work with a lot of athletes. A lot of my work has been in strongman or strength competition, but my focus and my purpose is on using strength training as a model for self-development. So I work with athletes that are trying to move their way up the ranks in sports, but I have quite a few clients as well that are not athletes, not necessarily competing, but we are using the strength training process, learning how to lift weights and interact with this process of strength development as a way to learn how to be more confident and to get more accustomed to just the process of self-development. Because again, I think that there's a lot of different ways to do that, but the key, stress is a key to growth. Stress is a key for learning. And it's not stress inherently that is bad, but the right understanding how to expose ourselves to the right amount, right? How to modulate the stress that we experience or how to respond to it. And strength training gives us a very physical, a very tangible and accessible way to raise our tolerance for stress, right? To give us the ability to handle more over time, right? So that's one way to take control of stress. We can't necessarily change a lot of our external stressors. Right? There's a lot of things that we don't get to control that stress us out. So one of the ways that we can moderate stress without taking control of things that we don't have influence over is to raise our tolerance for that stress, and strength training gives us that ability. So that's what I help people learn how to do.
Thank you for sharing, Leifa. I appreciate you a lot, and thank you for being a guest on the podcast. At the end of the day, you're sharing your time with me and with the audience, and that is the most valuable resource you have, and we are very grateful.
Well, I think I agree. I think that our time is our most valuable resource. So how we're choosing to spend it, the things that we're choosing to work on are very important. And that's why I think choosing to work on ourselves is almost always going to be a very good choice. So I appreciate the ability to share how my focus on that is able to hopefully show other people they can do it too.
Thank you, Leifa. Have a great day, okay?
You too, Juan. Take care.